عاطفه موسوی I'm Atafa Mousavi, postdoctoral researcher at Shahid University of Technology. Is my voice okay? I think there's some kind of echo. Let's deactivate this one. Sorry. I'm great to present Dr. Daniel Gruss, who is a problem. So I'm great to present Dr. Daniel Gruss, who is a assistant professor in Graz University and is a designer of Meltdown Spectre, co-designer of Meltdown and Spectre attacks. So this will be an insightful presentation. I think this is one of the best ones we can listen about these attacks. He will present some basics from basics to arbitrary read and write primitives for microarchitectural attacks. So with no waste of time, I will invite you to join us about these attacks. You can't write. You can write your questions here, but we will ask them in the middle of the presentation to listen well, and then we can ask them then, not now. So thank you, Mr. Dr. Gruss. Let's start it with no waste of time. Thanks.
Sorry, excuse me, Daniel. Before starting your talk, it seems that you are enlarging the chat box. Is it correct? Are you changing it?
Oh yeah.
When you enlarge the chat box, maybe it's better for you. But the problem is that it's also changed for everybody, and then others can't. See the slide. Now it's better. So everybody, since Daniel is using mix video and the slides, so if you want to enlarge his video, you can use your setting. So you can actually enlarge it yourself. But Daniel, please don't enlarge the chat box because you are operator, and now it will change everything. Okay.
Okay.
But Aatafa will read the questions for you during your talk if it's fine for you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay. I compiled the slides 2 days ago, so it has the wrong date because I always just put the compile date there. The talk today is microarchitectural attacks from basics to arbitrary read and write permissions. And the idea of this talk was that I basically talk about attacks that can lead to arbitrary read permissions and also attacks that lead to arbitrary write permissions. I will focus, however, more on the write permission as this is more powerful and we had more recent works in this space that I would like to talk about more. My name is Daniel Gruss. I'm from Graz University of Technology, and I would say let's get started with a short video from a TV show called Designated Survivor.
The hacker used a DRAM rowhammer exploit to gain kernel privileges.
Hey Chuck, yeah, I've got something for you.
So this is actually a DRAM rowhammer exploit here that you can see running in the browser. We did this in 2015, and it's really fun to see that this makes it into the movies that they make. You can see here what is going on. We are seeing here the rowhammer running in an HTML file in JavaScript. You see some timing histogram here on the left side, and then bit flips where the value that we read is not the value that we wrote there. So the value changed without actually changing it. How does that work? Well, this is a DRAM, as we just heard in the TV show, a DRAM rowhammer exploit. So let's talk about DRAM. DRAM is organized in as this module here, maybe multiple chips, and you have also maybe multiple modules, maybe 2 modules here. We call this dual channel setup, and this dual channel setup can work in parallel. So you can have multiple multiple DRAM modules that can operate entirely in parallel.
It seems that there's a problem with your voice. Can you please reconfigure the voice? There is some kind of noise on it.
There's noise on the voice. Let me check. I can.
Thanks.
Is the noise still there?
But we can understand. Let's do some increasement on the voice. Can it be increased?
Okay, let me check. Is it too loud? Is the voice too loud or?
We can understand. Thanks. We can understand your voice. Let's continue.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's just continue. Yeah, the DRAM channels, we have multiple of these. We can work in parallel, and we have also multiple sites of one such DIMM module. One of these RAM modules is called a DIMM, dual inline module, memory module, and we have these two sites that we call ranks. They can again work to some extent in parallel. Then for the chips themselves, we also have more parallelism there within a chip because they are further divided into banks. You can see them here illustrated. The first bank here and the other banks are behind that. These banks also can work to some extent in parallel. Each of these banks has a large number of rows, maybe 32,000 in this example, and then a row buffer. Whenever you want to read something from a row, data is copied into the row buffer, but we will get to that in a second again. These rows actually store the data that we want to store in the DRAM cells, basically with capacitors and transistors. So you would find 64K cells in the capacitor and in the transistor each, and that's basically how you store the data there. When you want to read something, you of course have to enable this transistor. Let's put some charge on this transistor so that you can then read the charge from the capacitor back onto the wire. So how does this work from a system engineer's perspective? Well, you see some timing differences actually when you want to work with the DRAM. And we have this row buffer here. If you access DRAM memory, if you access DRAM cells, you will actually see that the latency falls into one of two timing categories. Either it's a row hit or it's a row miss. And most of these are row misses, also called row conflicts. So what are these cases? Let's maybe take a look at this in the following graphic. So we have here the DRAM bank again, and I'm looking at the yellow and the green DRAM banks now. When I read something from a DRAM row, as I said before, we have to copy it into the row buffer. Now the yellow line is copied into the row buffer. If I now want to access the green row, then this is a row miss or a row conflict because there's a different row in the row buffer. So this takes more time because now this yellow row has to be written back and the green line has to be, the green row has to be copied over. Now there's another effect. You probably know that capacitors discharge over time just by itself. They lose charge over time. So they have to be refreshed from time to time. So this happens all the time. But there's a second effect that cells also leak faster upon proximate accesses because the isolation between the different cells, the layers that we have between them, this is not perfect. And some electrons jump over there. At least that's the theory to that. And this is the so-called row hammer effect. So if you would do this often enough, access the yellow and the green rows often enough, some bits in the middle might flip because you drained enough charge from cells that were between these two rows. The question then, of course, is how widespread is this issue? Of course, we know that bit flips occur if you send a computer to space because of all the radiation there. But in normal situations, we don't expect that many bit flips. But if we take a look at this rowhammer issue, we find that actually 85% of DRAM modules are affected. Seaborn and Julian found 52% to be affected, but they only looked at a single configuration, and that was a dual channel setup with dual rank on Ivy Bridge and Sandy Bridge laptops. So if they had any other configuration of the memory mappings, they wouldn't have found a bit flip. DDR4 was first believed to be safe, but we already showed in 2016 that we had bit flips on DDR4. Marshall and Tain then showed also in 2016 with a small sample size, though, that 67% were affected. There are more recent studies that basically confirm this figure. Here's a figure from the 2014 ISCA paper by Kim et al. And they also showed this interesting plot here where they show each dot, a DRAM module, that the number of bit flips that they found was lower for younger modules. Now there are two possible explanations, and also the other observation is that for each manufacturer it starts getting worse at some point. So there are multiple explanations for this. One explanation is that when they go to a smaller manufacturing size, fewer nanometers, the process in the beginning is less perfect. It has more errors, so they will have more errors in the modules that they ship in the beginning. But the other explanation is that DRAM modules, and this is also something that is confirmed already with experiments, that chips age over time. You have this aging of chips. So over time, the chip will get worse and worse, and you will have more bit flips if you hammer older DRAM modules. You can see this across all manufacturers. You can see the lines going up for the older modules, not so much for the green ones, so this is less clear, but the manufacturing date apparently has an influence on the number of bit flips. But in general, we can say bit flips everywhere. Okay, so maybe let's continue with how this rowhammer attack works, because now we heard that it's widespread. We can do something bad with that. We've seen that in a TV show that hacker used a DRAM rowhammer exploit. So the question is, how can we actually do that? For a rowhammer attack, we need to achieve three things. First, we need to get uncached memory accesses so that they reach the DRAM. Usually, memory accesses are all cached and we cannot reach the DRAM. They need to be fast because there's this refresh, because the capacitors need to be refreshed anyway all the time. And the DDR standard even defines how often it has to be refreshed, and this is usually something like 64 milliseconds. Once in 64 milliseconds, the DRAM row has to be read and written back, and that's a refresh. And then they also have to be targeted. We need to reach a specific row, or maybe two specific rows, so that we can hammer the row in between these two rows. If we don't achieve this, then we might also not see bit flips. So these are the requirements for the bit flips. So let's go through these step by step. How do we get the uncached accesses, and enough of them? So there are different access techniques. The CL flush instruction was used in the original 2014 paper, and then we showed that cache eviction can be used. Abeke et al. Also showed that in parallel, that cache eviction can be used instead of the CL flush instruction. Then Chiao and Seaborn showed that you can use non-temporal accesses like these morph NTA instructions. And Van der Veen used uncached memory by just marking the memory as uncacheable in the page tables. Next question is, how do we target the accesses? We want to reach the right locations in the DRAM. And for that, we worked on, in 2016, we worked on the so-called DRAMA paper, DRAMA. We also had a Black Hat talk on that, how your DRAM becomes a security problem. And there we reverse engineered how this mapping from physical addresses to DRAM cells works. The next question is, how can we exploit these bit flips, because they are random, right? These are random bit flips. The thing is, they are not random. They are actually highly reproducible. If you flip a bit and you hammer in the same locations again, you will have a high probability that the same bit will flip again. So what do? You first choose a data structure that you can place at an arbitrary memory location. You scan for good bit flips that flip a bit in the right offset of this memory region. And then you place the data structure there that you want to attack, and you trigger the bit flip again. Alternatively, if you don't want to mount an attack, there also have been proposals to build a physically unclonable function with Rowhammer, because these bit flips are difficult to predict if you don't know the module and if you didn't have time to scan through it. And it takes a really long time to scan through it. We will look at an attack strategy now where we modify instructions. So we will try to place a page with instructions at the right memory location where we can induce a bit flip. The basic idea was already deployed by Siobhan and Julian in 2015, and they looked at x86 opcodes which have a variable length. So if you take a look at sandbox like the NACL sandbox that they used for Chromium or for Chrome, then they saw that unsafe opcodes can be a part of a longer but safe multi-byte opcode. And because you cannot jump there without alignment, this is safe. The problem now is with Rowhammer, you can fault things and you might be able to fault a jump instruction such that you jump to an unsafe opcode. Yes, this is basically what they did. They flipped the bit in a validated NACL instruction sequence, and then the safe and validated jump becomes an arbitrary jump. Another strategy will be flipping page table entry bits, and for that we will first take a look at page table entries. Here are the ones for x86 64-bit mode, and you can see here the present bit up there, read-write permission, user space accessible, write-through, uncacheable. These are for the cache. Then we have the reference and the dirty bit, where you can track whether the page has been used. We have the size bit, the global bit, and here's the execution disabled bit. And some parts are ignored, or in some cases also they are reserved for future use. But the large part, the red part here, is the physical page number. The physical page number points to the physical memory location where this virtual memory location should map to. So you map a virtual memory location page-wise to a physical memory location. Each page consists of 512 such entries. And if we take a look at the virtual address space now and how this maps to physical memory, it will look like this. We have the virtual memory here, starting at address 00, null, so address 0, and it goes up to 2 to the 47 in the user space, and then it continues on the upper half from 2 to the 64 minus 2 to the 47 up to 2 to the 64. And each of these virtual memory locations needs a page table entry to map exactly this region to one page in the physical memory. Here you can see the gray area in the user space is mapped to this physical location here. Also, the page table itself will also be placed in the memory, but the user will not have a mapping to this page table. So the user cannot access this green area, the page table. Now imagine an attacker would be able to modify its own page table. Let's assume the attacker would be able to modify such a page table. Why would that be bad? Because now the user could change this reference here from this page table entry 0 for this virtual memory area, change it from this page to, for instance, this page, to the page table, and then modify the page table. So this would be very bad. Or the attacker could go and change, with the same capabilities, change this page table entry here, page table entry 1, the virtual addresses at this virtual address, so the virtual addresses of course stay the same. This virtual address currently points to this a violet page here. Now, going to the next one, now it points to this orange page here. And if we change this further, we can write any value in there if we can modify this page table. And then it points here, or we can let it point to a kernel page. Now we get access to kernel pages. So this is really bad. So page table manipulation allows us to get full control over the entire system because we can now modify the kernel. We can overwrite the kernel, we can do in the kernel space whatever we want. So this is basically the start of our attack. We want to get access to such a page table and then through that get access to a kernel page. So how does this work? Let's take a look at the memory. We have this organized maybe in rows, and we will just hammer random locations. And maybe if we are lucky at some point, we hammer 2 locations that are in these rows n-1 and n+1, and the row in the middle, row n, will be hammered. So then maybe we have a bit flip here, and this is all our own memory because we allocated this much memory. And we see that there is a bit flip here. So what do we do in the next step? We release the page with the bit flip. So now we don't use this page anymore. Then we fill all the remaining memory with page tables, with these green page tables that we just saw before, including this page. What will it look like now in the virtual memory or in the physical memory? Let's go back to this picture. Now the memory is filled almost entirely with page tables. There's barely anything else in the memory anymore, just page tables. This is very nice. We still don't have access to our own page table, but now let's assume that a bit flips in this large physical page number. This was the largest part. 2/3 of the page table entry were the physical page number. And now we flip this physical page number of this page table entry, and it will not point here anymore, but to some other page, maybe to this one, to this page table. What does that mean? That now whatever data we had here in this virtual address range is not there anymore. We cannot reach it through this virtual address range anymore, but instead we can reach a page table here and we can modify that. And this page table will be used somewhere else in our virtual memory. So what we can do is we go, we change this, we see that the data has changed, then we modify this page table, and then we go through the memory here and check where did something change. And if we find something that changed, then we found something that, then we found where we can read whatever we mapped here. Then we found which page table we are modifying. And with that, we would have access to the full physical memory of the system. So flipping bits in the page table has been used in several papers, and the strategy is basically summarized as scan for bit flips, then exhaust or massage the memory to place a page table at the target location. Then you will gain access to your own page table in the third step by flipping a bit in this target location, and then you get kernel privileges because you have access to the full memory, including the kernel. This strategy has been exploited in 2015 by C1 and Dulian, but we also used that from JavaScript in 2016. Others used that from virtual machines and on Android, and that's basically a very powerful strategy and difficult to mitigate. After running a row hammer attack, the question is, of course, what can we do afterwards? What can we attack with that? And there have been several techniques proposed for post-row hammer exploitation. For instance, you can scan the entire physical memory because that's very fast. You can read gigabytes per second there, or maybe gigabits per second. Then what you can do is you can search for special binary pages, modify them if they are executed with root privileges. For instance, this will give you also then root privileges. You can modify credential structs, for instance, if you have credential structs for different users, where one user is a super user, the other user is not. You can modify them. Now both are super user. You can read the SSH keys and modify them if you like. You can corrupt the signatures and then use that to serve incorrect updates to the system. You can modify certificates. You can change configurations of the system. There's basically no limit if you can scan the entire physical memory and modify whatever you like, because searching for the page that you want to modify in a system is feasible. There are no duplicate pages. If they have the same content, then they are the page that you're looking for. Because pages are pretty unique. You have 32,768 bits per page. And if you need, then change the data on every page that looks like the page that you want to modify. So this is fairly easy, this part. We can also combine bit flips with page deduplication. Page deduplication is an interesting feature where you would deduplicate, we would deduplicate the memory of the system. So if you have data multiple times in memory, you would deduplicate it and only have a single copy in your physical memory. And multiple processes would map to this physical memory. This is then a regular copy on write process, similar as you have after fork. So when using fork, creating a new process with fork, you also have this situation that multiple processes share the memory as copy on write. As soon as they write, they will get a copy. Now let's assume we have this page deduplication and we combine this with rowhammer. So we have again our bit flip here in this page, and in the next step we fill the page with the target content, with the same content that is here on this page that we actually want to modify. What the operating system will do is the operating system will scan through all the pages in the system. At some point it will also scan those two pages, compare them byte by byte, and then deduplicate them. And if the direction is fine, if we deduplicate from this direction to this direction, then we can induce the bit flip afterwards here. There are also, to maybe go a step back, because this was all about how to exploit rowhammer and how to do this if you get the bit flips. Maybe we should take a step back, we should go a step back and think about how we can actually rowhammer. There are also different hammering techniques that we need to discuss. And these hammering techniques, there's first of all the rowhammer technique that I've already showed you. The first one, hammering just random locations and hoping that they are in places such that a bit flip occurs. We usually speak of victim rows here, and usually we would expect that one of the so-called aggressor rows would be next to the victim row, and in some cases, or in more cases, it would be both of the aggressor rows that are next to the victim row. Then you get the most bit flips. In this strategy, you hammer also other random rows, or basically you only hammer random rows. For instance, in the exploit by Seaborn and Dulian, this would be 8 random rows for a DDR3 chip. The DDR3 chip has 8 banks, and in the setup that they chose with dual rank, dual channel, and 8 banks, you get to 32 possibilities where you are hammering, in which bank you are actually hammering. That means with 8 locations that they hammer at once, you can then compute the probability, and it's I think it was around 70% that they actually hammer 2 locations in the same bank with 1 attempt. But it doesn't mean that they are next to a victim row. It just says they are in the same bank, so they potentially hammer rows within 1 bank. The other strategy, which requires more knowledge about the system, is hammering 2 rows neighboring a victim row. This is the one that I've showed you in the beginning, where you hammer 2 rows directly next to a victim row. This is more targeted, but it also requires that you know the mapping from physical addresses to DRAM cells, and also the mapping from virtual to physical addresses. Both are difficult to acquire. The one you can acquire by reverse engineering. The other you can acquire, on modern systems. This is more difficult because this very often requires root privileges. So this is getting more and more difficult. So this step of the exploit is sort of mitigated. Let's take a look at the strategies again. Illustration makes everything easier. So we have the single-sided hammering, the first option. We have it here with random locations, in this case 3 locations, and we just hammer them and we hope for bit flips next to one of them. So that means we have to check the memory for bit flips all the time while hammering. For double-sided hammering, it's the same. We also hammer 2 locations in this case instead of 3, but we also have to scan the entire memory for bit flips, because the bit flips likely will occur here in this location, in this middle row, but they can also occur in the other rows close by. In 2018, we've been working on a new rowhammer attack and actually on a rowhammer defense, and we tried to find what is the minimal case when bit flips occur. And one of our students then basically found out that hammering 2 rows, that's nice, but hammering a single row still works and is even more exciting. So we only hammer a single row, no multiple rows, no reverse engineering, nothing necessary. We just hammer a single memory location, because every memory location has to go to DRAM. And we call this one location hammering to also make a contrast to single-sided hammering, which actually hammers 8 or more locations. One location hammering hammers only one location. And we just activate this row again and again. And you might wonder now, how does this work? Because we've just seen in the beginning that this should not work, because the DRAM row buffer would buffer this, right? Well, how can we just access always this row? Do we have to access another row in between? No, we don't. Why does this work? I will get to that in a second after this demo video. So you can see here the rowhammer attack on one of our systems. We hammer a few times, then we scan it through the entire memory, and you can see then after a few hammering attempts, you can see a lot of bit flips, and you can see which values we read instead of what we expected. Very nice, a lot of bit flips here. Why does this work? So older works on rowhammer assume that DRAM always uses an open page policy, because this is energy efficient. You keep a row opened and buffered until you don't need it anymore, until the user requests something else. This is nice because you have low latency for subsequent accesses to the same row, but a high latency is not so nice for accesses to any other row. But it makes a lot of sense if you think about a single core system where one application is running and it will access more and more data from the same row, because a row consists of 8 kilobytes of memory, so you can read quite a lot of data from this single row. Maybe you also want to write it back to this row. This is also efficient then. But there are also other policies, for instance, the closed page policy, where you would immediately close the row. You maybe batch some of the reads and writes together, but you would, at the point the row is opened, you would already determine when the row will be closed. So this is nice, because if you immediately close the row, then you are ready to open a new row earlier. So this is very nice, because now you get medium latency for accesses to any row. So on average, this might perform better, and especially on multi-core systems. On multi-core systems, this is really a lot better, because on a multi-core system, you will still have a single memory controller, but the memory requests come in from all the cores, and they will definitely go to different memory locations, because there will be different programs running in most of the cases. So what we found is that policies that preemptively close rows, like the closed row policy, they allow one location hammering. And we observed these on desktop computers, but also on server computers. On mobile devices, we saw the open page policy to be used more often. Let's take a look at how many bit flips we can actually observe here for the different strategies on a desktop system. We tried this on an i7 6700K with two DRAM, DDR4 DRAM modules. And we can see that double-sided hammering works very nice. So if we hammer for 8 hours, I think it was 8 hours non-stop hammering, we can see that 77% of the bit offsets within a 4 kilobyte page were covered. 51.7% of the flips were from 0 to 1. In the case of single-sided hammering, we saw even more bit offsets, and again, approximately half of them were 0 to 1, the others were 1 to 0. And then in the case of one location hammering, of course, there we hammer fewer locations in the same time because we hammer for the same amount of time per hammering attempt. So we have roughly half as many as in the cases where we hammered multiple locations as at once. So the distribution here from 0 to 1 flips is roughly the same. So we can see that one location hammering is a real alternative to these others, and we don't need any reverse engineering for this. And it also works very nicely on some systems where we couldn't have bit flips before. What if we cannot target kernel pages? Some defenses propose that we shouldn't have access to kernel pages because they are physically not placed in proximity to pages that the user can control. And for that, we came up with a strategy called opcode flipping. The basic observation is that many applications perform actions as root, and this can be also used by unprivileged users. For instance, think about ping or mount, or another example, sudo. You probably all have used sudo already, and sudo has to run with root privileges because it has to be able to give you root privileges. It's a so-called setuid binary, meaning that when you start it, even if you're not a super user, you will still run this as root, and sudo will then drop privileges in case you don't need the root privileges. So in our case, we target sudo, and in sudo, we have this password comparison. If the user has to enter a password, then you will have to compare the strings, and then if the string is correct, you perform a jump to the code that is executed if the password was correct. This jump is something like a jump equal. And a jump equal, if we look at the opcode and illustrate this in binary, this is the opcode for jump equal. If we flip a single bit in there, let's see what we get out of that. This is the halt instruction. This is bad. We couldn't execute this in a user process. XOR B doesn't get us far. Push Q prefix doesn't get us far. Oh, this is already interesting. Jump, I think it's jump less. Jump overflow, jump below or equal. Jump not equal. This is really nice. Jump not equal. Now we turn around the logic. Now every time someone enters a correct password, they will get a password rejected. And every time you enter a wrong password, you will get root privileges. This is very nice. And conditional jumps are not the only targets. We actually performed a manual analysis of sudo, and we found 29 possible bit flips in the sudo binary that we can exploit. All of them somehow skip the password check or invert the password check, things like that. How do we get the target virtual page now to be placed at the target physical location? In the case of the page tables, this was very easy, but in case of sudo, this gets more complicated. And we got a new technique for that as well, called memory waylaying. This is a form of massaging the memory, but a very simple one that takes a lot of time. If a binary is loaded for the first time, it's loaded into memory. And it stays in memory in the page cache even after execution. So it will never be kicked out of the page cache until maybe the page cache is full. And the page cache will be all of the unused memory in your system. So that's a really large amount of memory. So what we do with memory waylaying is basically we just wait and watch until the page is at the right offset, and then we hit it with this bit flip. So pretty much like this, wait for it and then hit it with the bit flip. So this is also what we illustrate here. We can see the memory. Some parts are used, which are shown in blue. Some parts are occupied by the page cache, illustrated with the red dashed lines here. And this is the target location where we want to get our binary page. So in the next step, we would fill the entire memory with some data, access the binary page again, and then we repeat this over and over and over again until the binary page is at a target location that we can flip. We looked at how the memory is covered if we do this, so which memory locations we can reach with the binary page, and pretty much the entire memory can be reached with this binary page. It just takes a long time. So there's a trade-off between searching for more flippable locations and scanning a longer time until the binary page is at the right offset. This has a great advantage over the previous approaches which worked with memory exhaustion, because memory exhaustion brings your system very close to out of memory. In many cases, if you would try a rowhammer exploit that you find online, in many cases it will get your make your system run out of memory. With our attack, this changes a bit. The system reports the memory utilization as to not really increase, because we are using page cache pages for the eviction. So these are still evictable for the system, and we get nowhere near out of memory. I will still continue a bit until I've finished this topic of rowhammer, which is where I just have one more chapter, and then we're basically done with the rowhammer part, and I will continue afterwards. We can make a short break there and then continue with the second fault attack. But let's first talk about SGX. SGX is a really nice feature in Intel CPUs, which allows you to take some part of the application, place it in a trusted enclave. So you would have, you create the enclave, you have this trusted part running here with trusted functions that the user cannot manipulate. You have call gates, so that when the untrusted part wants to use some trusted functionality, it has to go through these call gates, pretty much like system calls. It has the same security idea behind it. There runs trusted code here, and you can only reach it via these call gates. Then the trusted functionality is executed, and we return to the user, and then the user can continue with whatever. The operating system can also not execute or access this trusted part. The operating system can, well, it can start an enclave or stop an enclave, but it cannot directly access what is happening inside an enclave. The enclave memory is not only not accessible to the operating system, but it's also protected against physical attacks. Against physical attacks, this memory is placed in this physical region, the EPC, with 128 megabytes of memory. And we know about this area that it's integrity protected and encrypted. So if there's a bit flip in there, the integrity protection would find it. So then the question, of course, is what happens if a bit flips in the EPC? Well, the integrity check will fail. And what happens if the integrity check fails? If the CPU locks up the memory controller, not a single further memory access will be performed. The system halts immediately. At this point, the CPU stops. Yeah. Does it sound unsafe? It is unsafe, definitely. So, what if a malicious enclave induces a bit flip? The entire machine halts. But what if we do this in the cloud, for instance? Well, we proposed this in 2018. That was concurrent work with others that published this in late 2017, denial of service attacks in the cloud. But we can do something even more exciting with SGX, because SGX has this nice property that it protects software from malicious environments. And it, for instance, blocks performance counter analysis. This is really nice because this means that if we hammer from within SGX, we can defeat some countermeasures that rely on performance counters. This is really nice and really stealthy. We can see the attack here. It's running here. and we can see that this is a regular Ubuntu virtual machine, and you can see that sudo is not, it's a regular sudo, it's not modified. Typing in the password doesn't give us root privilege because we don't know the password. And now we will run this attack with one location hammering and with memory waylaying. And this is now a bit accelerated. This will actually take many hours. And now the password check in sudo is entirely skipped. And very nice part here is also we can unroll the changes as soon as we evict the sudo page again. Then it's gone from the memory again, and the modification is also gone. So we don't even leave traces here. You could say at least it's a local attack, right? But then I would like to ask you to look at these performance numbers. Well, we need 43,000 hammering attempts within 64 milliseconds for a bit flip. That's around 700,000 accesses per second. Network packets, when you receive network packets, depending on your kernel configuration and system configuration, are accessed up to 6 times in the same memory location. That means if we would get 111 packets per second, we might be able to induce bit flips. Network packets are at least 64 bytes, and with that we get to approximately 7 megabytes per second, approximately 57 megabits per second. This is doable on modern networks. We can definitely get this much traffic on modern networks. In 2017, we showed that we can do this, but actually we needed a lot more than this. We actually needed around 600 megabits per second to be able to induce bit flips. And with that, I would like to get to the first break. And if you have any questions, I would like to answer them. I think I can't hear anything. Now I can hear you.
Insightful and interesting session with a 3D environment. Thanks. So we can ask your questions. Everybody, if you have a question, please raise your hand or write it down here.
I increased the volume now. I didn't understand earlier what the problem was. I thought it was too loud, but it should be a bit better now.
Yes, that's better. So I can use my turn to ask you a question. So can you explain me about the DMA and how, if possible, for a DMA device to perform such an rowhammer attack? Is it possible for an external device who has just an option RAM which runs before the OS? So these number of accesses, is it possible to put it in an option RAM or not?
So the I'm not sure I understood the question correctly. In what kind of RAM?
We have an DMA based rowhammer attack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mean based on virtual addresses?
Virtual addresses.
So DMA. Sorry. Okay. So DMA-based rowhammer attacks. As a DMA-based attacker, I guess you have access to the physical memory anyway, but it depends a bit on. The threat model. So if you think of something like a cloud system with an IO MMU, then probably this is still something you could do. But the question is what advantage you get over uncacheable memory, because you can also just use uncacheable memory there.
Thanks. So we have another question here. Is type of architecture doesn't matter in rowhammer attacks. So the question is about the architecture's difference.
Yeah, so like ARM or x86 or different architectures. It does matter because on different architectures you have different capabilities. For instance, on ARM, you in many cases don't have a flush instruction that you can use. So instead, you would have to fall back to either eviction or more elegantly to uncacheable memory. But if you can't get uncacheable memory on ARM, then you would have to resort to eviction, and that's much more difficult and works on fewer systems. Question that is not part of this presentation. Can you explain the flush and flush attack briefly? So if you think about the flush and, we would probably first talk about the flush and reload attack there. So the flush and reload cache attack has this property that it targets cache sets. So you have the cache that is organized into multiple sets. On Intel processors, since many years, you would have in the last level cache, for instance, 2048 sets, in some cases 1024 sets. And these sets then have something like 16 ways that are equivalent, where the data goes into any of these ways. The flush and reload attack exploits that shared memory will be shared in the cache. So if you load data from the DRAM into the cache, it will always be in the same set. And if you have multiple processes that can access this shared memory, for instance, read-only memory, for instance, if you think of a shared library like OpenSSL, there might be parts of the cryptographic algorithms that are not secret, but if you would know when someone accesses it, that would be a secret. So, for instance, the T-tables in AES, they are not secret themselves. They are public, but knowing when and where an access to these happens, that is secret. So the T-tables are shared in memory, so they are also shared in the cache. And that means that with flush and reload, if you access the T-table, you will be able to measure the memory latency. You can now flush this memory location, so you now know that it's definitely not in the cache anymore. And then if you re-access it, there are two options what can happen. Either now it's fast, that means that some other process has loaded exactly this location into the cache, or it's slow, that means that the other process did not, that no other process did load this back into the cache. The flush and flush attack basically works exactly the same, just that we don't measure this reload operation, which loads it back into the cache and measures the latency of that, but we measure the latency of the flush instruction directly. So we flush a memory location and measure how long that takes. If the memory location is in the cache, then it will take more time because it has to do something. If it's not in the cache, then this is just a quick check and the CPU immediately knows, oh, okay, I don't have anything to do here. Did this answer your question? Otherwise, just ask more questions. Then are they all vulnerable? So I think this refers to the architectures and Rowhammer. So for Rowhammer and ARM, yeah, this is vulnerable, and x86 is also vulnerable. Both AMD and Intel, they are all vulnerable. I don't think it has been demonstrated on all of the platforms. I'm not sure about PowerPC, for instance, but in general, DRAM modules are the same. So I would expect that they are also all vulnerable. It's just a question of how you can bring the CPU to perform these accesses fast enough to the DRAM. But in general, it's there's not much of a difference between the architectures here. After the advent of modern microarchitectural attacks like Meltdown, Spectre, and so on, is the implementation of flush and reload, the flush and reload attack on encryption algorithms valuable. So if you find an encryption algorithm, an implementation of a crypto algorithm that is even used in practice or might be used in practice in the near future, I would definitely say it's valuable if you find this flaw and fix this flaw before people with malicious intent would do the same. So it's definitely valuable to find flaws in cryptographic implementations, even with Spectre and Meltdown. Spectre and Meltdown get their own mitigations, so we still have to focus on these cache attacks as well. Okay.
If there's no other question.
Mm-hmm.
So did it talk about reading by Rowhammer attacks? Reading some desired part of memory with Rowhammer attacks? Did you talk about it? I mean, RAM bleed and some these kind of attacks which tries to read some desired points. Did you talk about it? I didn't get it.
So how you would find what the target memory location is?
No difference about what the target memory point is. I didn't get the point how they read. I think I get the point about writing in the memory, but didn't the point about how to read some points.
So for DRAM, for the Rowhammer attack, you would you fill the entire memory with your own data, and you can of course read that because it's your own data, and then of course you can search for bit flips in this memory that's your own memory, and then use that later on for further exploitation. And for instance, if you would now take the page tables, what did we do with this page table now that we got access to our own page table? We modified it such that we can read any location of the physical memory by changing this physical page number in the page table entry.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no other question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you like, I can continue with the slides. Okay, would that be fine? Mm-hmm. Then I'll just continue. Yeah, there are also other attacks than Rowhammer that allow to induce bit flips in the memory of a system, or not necessarily in the memory, but maybe also in other parts of the system. So what attacks do we have there, for instance? One attack that we know is clock screw, attack that would overclock the CPU on ARM-based devices, and by that induce bit flips in the ARM trust zone. But also on Intel, we had these tools like RM clock, throttle stop, Linux Intel undervolt, and there's also a PhD dissertation looking at the capabilities there that you get with the Intel power management. Most of them focus on this MSR here, MSR Nullix 150, and you can see that you can change the voltage offset here in units of 121 divided by 1024 volts. Okay. If we do that, if we change the voltage offset, the question is, of course, can we fault something with that? So will it fault? If we take a look at this algorithm here, very simple algorithm, we have a multiplier, we have correct and variable that are multiplied in the same way, and while they have the same value, we will recompute this variable here with the same computation. So this loop should never stop. Let's take a look at this. So we run this. I will maybe skip a bit ahead here. Yeah, we have to load all of this. We have to run the code. We can see that it's the same code. And if we undervolt this now, what happens? Oh, and there we have it at minus 259. We see that the result is not correctly computed anymore. And if we try that with further values, then we will find that at different undervolting levels, we will find more and more bit flips. Here at minus 233. So we have more and more bit flips. Here's another one. And here is another one. So we can have as many bit flips as we like, just by undervolting. We looked at the threshold here. So we looked at what is the voltage that we need to set so that we have bit flips, and you can see that there's a substantial margin between the base voltage that the shipped product has and the voltage that we need to set to be able to induce a bit flip. Okay. So of course that means we have some potential attack here, and that means that we need to come up with a cool name, because people called it on Twitter. Given a cool name, researchers will be able to find a new vulnerability to match it in a finite period of time, and cool name logo combination requirements have no measurable effect on the aforementioned period. And here we have our first combination from vaulting and hammering, and we looked at popular media there and used Thor's hammer here to create Volt Hammer. But this, what we said, no, we don't like this. We will choose something else. Volt Hammer is not nice. It's too close to Raw Hammer. And also we don't have a real attack yet. So maybe let's attack something that Raw Hammer couldn't attack. For instance, the integrity protected SGX EPC. We will see this attack here. So we run the same multiplication thing with undervolting, and we see the same bit flips again inside SGX. So this means we can maybe focus on an SGX attack here. More bit flips inside SGX. Let's call it maybe SGX screw, like a clock screw and SGX. But again, this is not just, it's not just SGX and undervolting. This is maybe more. We can also attack concrete algorithms. Let's maybe attack RSA. So I'm not a cryptographer, but I roughly know what RSA does. It's public key crypto. You can use it to encrypt or sign messages. You can then send messages over an untrusted channel. You have the encrypt or verify operation to messages with the public key. So with the public key, you can encrypt or verify the messages, or with the private key, you can decrypt or sign messages. How does this work? Well, if you use the Chinese remainder theorem, you can actually simplify these formulas a bit, because they might look handy like this, but they are actually quite difficult to compute. So you would split these up, and instead of this expensive exponentiation here, you would instead perform cheaper operations. For instance, these down here, and then you can use them later on here in this to compute the actual signature. This is a signature generation. Now, what we want to look at is the case where we compute two signatures, and the signatures should be the same, but they are not. Why is that interesting? Because this middle part here, let's assume the bit flip occurs within this middle part here. Then we have something and something else. And we can basically look at the rest. What else do we have left? Times Q plus S2. We can cut this away and we will have the same result. So it's basically, if we subtract one from the other, it's something times Q, which means that we can compute the greatest common divisor, and that will give us Q. So let's take a look at that. We use the IPSS RSA implementation. That's the Intel implementation for RSA. And we can take a look at how this works. And sorry, I just clicked too early. Let's go back to the attack. Okay, and we can see when we flip the bits here, or try to flip the bits by undervolting, usually everything is fine. And if we go low enough, we get a wrong signature, which cannot be used to verify anymore. In the verification, it fails. Then we perform a Lenstra attack, which just computes this GCD basically. And then we have our private key computed here, and we can see that it's correct. Yes, and this, of course, we can combine this and can call it Mufasa, my undervaulting fault attack on RSA. I like these name combinations, but what else can we break? It's not just RSA, so maybe let's go for AES. AES, I think you might have already heard about that as well. Again, I'm not a cryptographer. I only know as much as that it's symmetric key crypto, and you encrypt messages for transfer over a public channel. We have a 4x4 byte state, and we have these 10 rounds where it always performs this S-box lookup, shift rows, mixed columns, and add round key. And we will take a look at the last few rounds, because you can actually compute how values propagate through this cipher. But through the entire cipher is really unfortunate, because the probabilities get lower and lower that the value from here will propagate to a value here in a way that you can compute it. So going back to something like the 8th round is still doable, but a lot more would at some point be infeasible. So what we focus on is this flipping of bits here in the last few rounds, for instance, in the 8th round. So let's take a look also at the AES and I instructions here. These are the AES instructions that Intel included in their hardware implementation. So this is a hardware implementation of AES. We are not attacking a weak software implementation that uses T-tables, but this is actually a hardware implementation. And we will take a look at whether we can fault this one. What do we do? Well, we just have some randomly generated plaintext, and we encrypt it twice, and we check whether the result is the same. If it's not the same, we step out of this loop. So let's take a look at how this works. And we can see that we have errors, but not in the right round. So yeah, this is better. Round number 8. This is good. If we have round number 8, so we have a correct and faulty pair. We have actually a second pair of correct and faulty. Let's use those and then perform a differential fault analysis attack and just print out the remaining key. And this is the remaining key that we find. So let's check whether this is the correct key that we entered in the code. And it is the correct key that we entered in the code. Perfect. But this means that we cannot just attack RSA, but also AES. So we could give this a new name, maybe focusing that on the topic of crypto here. It's basically a crypto vault screw hammer because it attacks crypto inside this SGX vault. It's a bit like clock screw and a bit like row hammer. So I designed this crypto vault screw hammer logo, but people didn't like it either. So we had to move to something else. And we thought about what else can we do with it? Actually, we can also corrupt memory operations. Take a look at this memory operation here, an array lookup. And this array lookup, if you look at how pointer arithmetic works, actually is a multiplication with a number. And we know that we can fault multiplication. So what can we do with that? Let's take a look at this again inside an enclave, and we undervolt, and you can see that the enclave limits go from here to there. So anything outside of that memory is not trusted. So you can see that. So if we would access any memory outside of that for our secure enclave operations, then the attacker can manipulate that. For instance, in this case, we wrote to this memory location by faulting it, right? It's not pointing into this green unsafe area, secure area anymore, but it's now pointing to some red area that is not trusted. And we can see what the enclave wrote there. Here's the secret written to our page that we now just mapped there. It's dead beef. And we can see that this is also the secret that we wrote there in the source code. So this is really nice. Even if the code is entirely bug-free, with that, we can leak the secrets from the enclave. For instance, with a simple write access to an array, because we fault the write access to the array. So we need a better name, right? This should be related to undervolting on the one side. It should be about bit flips in protected TE vaults, so undervolting vaults. We steal, we corrupt, we plunder, and this is how we got to Plundervolt, and this is what we call the attack, Plundervolt. And with that, I'm already at the end of my talk. Microarchitectural attacks from basics to arbitrary read and write. We focused on the write permission. For read permissions, there's also attacks like Meltdown, Spectre, Zombie Load, but this would be another complete talk. I could talk another 2 hours about that, and we don't have the time for that today, but I would like to thank you for your attention here. And if you have any questions, I'm very happy to discuss anything, any topic with you. Thank you. I think I can't hear anything. Now I can hear something.
So I would like to thank you again for your great presentation. So there are some questions here. Can you explain about software with CPA such an attacks?
Okay, so this is about the Intel RAPL interface. Yeah, so we started working on this attack with the Intel RAPL interface already in 2017. And what this interface gives you is basically the power consumption of the CPU, or actually different parts of the CPU, on a granularity of something like, it goes down to a few microseconds, like 50 microseconds, or for some other parts, it's like 50 milliseconds. So it's actually not very, very fine-grained. It's rather coarse in terms of the speed of a processor. What we can do there is we can combine this again with SGX, and SGX allows you to, or the thread model of SGX allows you to basically interrupt an enclave again and again, and you can, in extreme cases, even zero-step an enclave. So the enclave would try to execute an instruction, but you would stop it before it's far enough. So it just goes 0 steps, no steps at all. And while doing that, you can actually measure the power consumption over this instruction again and again. That means that you can amplify the power consumption of this one instruction as much as you like. With that, you can then mount a more traditional differential power analysis attack, or in other cases, simple power analysis attack, depending on the cryptographic algorithm, or in general, the algorithm that you want to attack. So we did different attacks with that, for instance, attacks on KSLR, which are more like simple power analysis attacks, but also attacks on AES, where it was more like a differential power analysis attack.
Right, these are my questions here. I have 2 questions.
There's more questions. Is there a way to perform such power vaulting configuration at a system level? Yes, so this is in software. So you perform these operations from software. and it changes the configuration for the entire system. So also for the trusted enclaves that are running.
Where are these MSRs? On the CPU or something else, or some system level power management chip? I mean, these MSRs on some registers in CPU or other chips which affect all the system.
So these MSRs are part of the CPU, and you can reach them from software. System software can reach them.
So the power of the TPM will also change with.
I'm not sure about the power of the TPM, because at least in some cases the TPM chip is a separate chip, and I'm not sure whether you can configure this via.
So there's CPU levels. Thanks. And can you also answer to the second question? How fast are these attacks?
So for Rowhammer, it depends a bit. So if you have a system that is vulnerable to Rowhammer and you have this well reverse engineered and you know the physical addresses, then you might be able to induce a bit flip within a few seconds and exploit this bit flip within a few seconds. In other cases, for instance, with undervolting and memory waylaying, if the more straightforward and faster techniques don't work, then you would be slower. So in this case, it can even take multiple days of row hammering until an exploit is successful. This is a lot slower. Then for the Plundervolt attack, this is again a question of how well you know the system, because every system reacts differently to undervolting. So you would have to profile the system a bit to be able to induce these faults successfully to exploit something. Otherwise, the system will also in many cases freeze, and then you cannot exploit it if you undervolt it too much. And basically, if you know that, then mounting an attack will work within a few seconds. But if you don't know these values, then you will have to reverse engineer that first, and this will take more time, maybe a few hours of reverse engineering. Are we able to change an instruction as it is fetched by the CPU? In case of Rowhammer, we followed instructions, basically the opcodes that are written in the DRAM, that are stored in the DRAM, and they are resident in the DRAM and are faulted there. In the case of Plundervolt, we fault operands of instructions most likely, but it has not been fully explored yet what we can all fault with Plundervolt.
I mean,
so there might be more things.
My question is about when we have changed the instruction, it have been fed to the pipeline and it has executed, because in few seconds is not very fast for some instructions, so it will be able to change some data rather than the instructions in an online manner. As
no, the Plundervolt attack changes an instruction's behavior while it is executed. You undervolt, then you run the instruction, and the instruction does not compute the result correctly. That's what happens. So this is on online data.
Thanks.
Exception handling like TSX in a microarchitectural attack. TSX is really nice if you know database systems. For instance, SQL, you might know SQL. There are these begin and commit or begin and abort statements that you can use. And everything that happens between the begin and the abort, or begin and commit, if you abort the transaction in the meantime, the cat wants to leave the room. And so if you abort the transaction in the meantime, all the SQL operations are unrolled and as if they would never have happened. So you can basically perform operations and then decide later on whether you want to commit them or not. And if something goes wrong, you will definitely unroll them. You cannot commit them anymore. TSX basically allows exactly the same on a CPU level, where the CPU you can tell with X begin. That's the instruction, the start instruction of TSX, X begin. You say, okay, from here on, if something goes wrong, I want to roll back to the start, and then I go to the else branch. So the xBegin will then jump to another location, to another code location, if the transaction was not successfully executed. This is, of course, very convenient, because if you now perform an operation that will crash the process, that is not allowed inside a TSX transaction, because it's a crash, so it cannot execute. So it will instead roll back and go into the else branch. But the CPU still attempts to perform these operations. So this is really nice to suppress exceptions. In the meltdown attack, must the attacker have information about the kernel address of the victim? In general, no, because for the meltdown attack, if you have a system that has no mitigations, what you would start with is probably you have locations in the kernel that you can quickly find by breaking KSLR. This takes a few seconds maybe to break KSLR. And then you know where the kernel stores, for instance, the thread structs. Then you have the thread structs. In the thread struct, there's the CR3 register of the thread or the process, and you can look this up. Now you have the mapping, the CR3 register for this process, which tells you which virtual address translates to which physical address. And that means that you just need, for instance, if it's a global variable in the victim process, then you know the virtual address of this variable. Otherwise, you might still have to break ASLR also in the process, which is trivial if you have access to the entire paging structures of the victim already, because you have access to the CR3 register and the value of the CR3 register. And you can look up the memory location where the CR3 register points, so you can read all the memory of the page table hierarchy. And with that, all the memory from the victim. If you want to, you can just dump the entire physical memory of the victim with that in the order of the virtual address space. Is there a remote scenario for the meltdown attack? In one recent paper, we showed that on older systems, especially 32-bit systems, you can mount a rowhammer attack from JavaScript. If this is remote enough, of course, this is JavaScript, but it's sort of remote, a bit remote.
If there is no other question, I should again thank you. It was a great opportunity to hear you and hear about these kind of multiple kinds of Warhammer attacks just in an hour. And hearing you was so interesting for me myself. And I know there was that was an insightful presentation for all of us. So if no other point to discuss, we can end this session by again thanking Dr. Gruss. He is an assistant professor in Graz University in Austria. So thank you all for participating in this session. I wish you all best wishes. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.